Good morning. Now we are dealing with lesson 5 part 2. But in part 2 there are two main different kinds of concepts, which are the strategies and, before the strategies, the kind of industries whenever facing globalization. So let's do the following. Let's divide them into two different videos, because when talking about the kind of industries, there's one model we are going to start which is more or less complicated. So I think that dividing it into parts will be especially interesting. Okay, so first of all, let's start with the kind of industries from globalization perspective. So there are two main kinds of industries. We can say that whenever there are two main kinds of something, there's somewhere in the middle. Well, we will talk about the somewhere in the middle, but there are two main streams, which are, first of all, global industries. In global industries, the competitive position of a firm in one country is related, very affected, very linked with its competitive position in any other country. Which we mean by this is that global leadership is normally not only possible, but is normally the rule. Okay. On the other hand, there are some multi-domestic, somehow also called multi-country industries, where the competitive position in one country is different or not affected by the position in other country. This means that it's possible, for instance, that in one country you are trying to use cost leadership and in other product differentiation, for instance, or that in one country you are nearly not present and in another country you are really relevant. Okay? Now, let me give you some examples. About the global industries, your competitive position tends to be global. For instance, the aircraft industry, the industry which produces planes. How many plane crafters can you tell me? Without Googling it. Yes, sure. Maybe all of you are thinking about Airbus, and then Boeing, and then what else? What else normally means no more, or just a few. Well, some one of you can be very interested in the aircraft industry and so on. But in fact, there are just a few companies competing in global markets. Okay, global leadership is possible, or if there's any kind of leadership, it is global. On the other hand, we have got multi-domestic or multi-country industries. In these industries, you can be perfectly leader in one country, disappeared in another, competing in a way in one country, not competing or competing in a very different way in another, and so on. The main industry I'm going to give you as an example, okay, is legal advisory. Lawyers, attorneys, and so on. Now, the thing is that so long as law is different from one country to another, it's possible that a company can be competing in many countries. I will give you an example afterwards, but there are global, not global, but there are international legal advisory firms. But on the other hand, their competitive position in one country is completely different or not related with the competitive position in another country. They normally don't share resources, capabilities, or not many of them. Okay, because of the difference of laws. Yes, obvious. Okay, so which are the features that classify industries among global and multi-domestic? On the other hand, I told you there was something in the middle. There's something in the middle, we are going to call it potentially global. And in fact, in potentially global industries lay the majority of industries we can consider, because they are not so global or not completely multi-domestic. Okay, but let me classify the industries using two different models. The first one is going to be the simple one. Well, we all know the value chain model of Michael Porter. Okay, if you remember the primary activities: inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, then marketing and sales, and then service. Okay, if we consider these activities, if the most important activities in an industry, in a whole industry, are the first ones, are inbound logistics, I mean receiving the factors into the production factory and producing itself, operations. Okay, if these are the most important activities, normally we are talking about global industries. This is the case of the aircraft industry. In the aircraft industry, the most important thing is producing planes. That's it. So receiving factors and producing planes. On the other hand, whenever the most important activities are in front of the customers, are service, are sales, or even distribution, outbound logistics, okay, whenever these three, especially service and sales, are the most important activities, then we are talking about multi-domestic or multi-country industries, where normally there are no global leaderships. Even if a company is a global leader, it's not so global leader as in the other kind of. So multi-domestic industries. Let me give you an example. Restoration. Restoration. The most important activities of restoration, are performed in front of the customer. So, in fact, these industries are multi-domestic or close to be multi-domestic. Okay, so that's it. But we will also use a more difficult but more specific model, which was created by Peter Solberg. Peter Solberg, in order to consider which kind of industry are we dealing with, considered two sides, two paths in order to study it: the supply side and the demand side. Let's go to the supply side. From the perspective of the supply side, in some industries, the competitive structure is concentrated. I mean, there are just a few firms in the industry, not many. Let me give you another example, the automotive industry. How many firms are there in the automotive industry? You are going to tell me, well, many, not many. In fact, you can even, not many people are able to tell more than 20 brands of cars, okay? And we are talking about brands, not firms. What about firms? So, the competitive structure in some industries is concentrated. In some other industries is tremendously fragmented. As I told you, restoration. Maybe you are going to tell me, but what about McDonald's? McDonald's, which is probably the most important, talking about sales, company in the Spanish market, okay? McDonald's altogether doesn't account for, let us say, 2% of the sales of restoration in Spain, being so important. So this is a fragmented industry. So the competitive structure, from concentrated to fragmented. Then the national specialization. Have you realized that in some industries, nearly all the companies which are operating belong to either the same country or just a few countries? Let me give you an example about the same country. Okay, nearly all the producers of sake, they belong to Japan. Okay, this is exaggerating. Let's talk about whiskey. How many countries are important when talking about whiskey? And maybe you're going to tell me, but in Spain we have got DIC. Yeah, great. Okay, but we are talking about the majority of the sales. How many countries? Maybe you're going to tell me about Scotland, Ireland, maybe the States, Germany, believe it or not, and not much more. Okay, so in some industries, the main companies are located in just a few countries. In some other industries, companies are completely divided amongst many countries and so on. So the degree of national specialization can be high or can be low. Okay. So combining both, we will have national industries. National industries means fragmented industries with companies or firms operating or belonging to many different countries. Regional industries. By regional, we mean economic regions, such as the European Union or NAFTA. Okay, so regional industries. In regional industries, we can find firms belonging to regions, to economic regions. The structure is more concentrated. Finally, global industries. Just a few firms and located in a few countries. Okay, from the demand side, there are two things we are going to study. First of all, access barriers. If markets can be easily accessed or not, depending on barriers to access, such as tariffs, such as, for instance, health regulations, import-export regulations, and so on. Okay, if there are many barriers, if there are just a few barriers. And believe it or not, for some industries, there are many more barriers. For instance, when moving food, there are more important barriers than when moving clothes. Then, demand similarity. Demand similarity, well, this is perfectly understandable. For some industries, the demand, it doesn't matter the country, is completely similar to any other. For instance, when talking about clothing, I see my you, in front of me, and I can hardly know where you come from, looking at your clothes, because you dress similarly, okay? You, the demand, are demanding more or less the same clothing, the same garments, okay? In some other industries, the demand is very different. Again, when talking about food, people from one country like normally different kinds of food than people from another, and so on, okay? So we have got, from the demand side, we have got markets which are difficult to be accessed, with many barriers and a demand which is completely different, atomized from one country to another. We have got moderately easy and easy. In easy markets to be accessed, there are just a few or no entry barriers, not access barriers at all, okay? And the demand is completely similar from one country to another. Now, let's combine both. Let's combine both. When we have got an industry where the supply side is made by national companies and it's difficult to be accessed, so national and difficult, we are in an extreme, which is multi-country industry. On the other hand, when we have got an industry where the supply side is global and markets are easy to be accessed, so global and easy, then we are on a global industry, which is the opposite side. Whenever the combination is different than these two, we are somewhere in the middle, okay? And this somewhere in the middle is something that we are going to call potentially global. So potentially global industries can be regional and easy, or regional and moderate, or Okay, we combine the supply side with the demand side. Hope you understood. I know this model is more complex, but on the other hand, it's a good model because it tries to get into all the parts which we have to explain, okay? So now we will move to the next part.